Hey, everybody, welcome back to the podcast. You're listening to the longest running superhero role playing game on earth. I'm your host, the Game Master, and we're going to be talking about all sorts of stuff today. Before I really get into it, I want to mention something. Um, I posted a video recently about some Justice League related stuff, and the artwork that I used for that video contained Christopher Reeve as Superman, Linda Carter as Wonder Woman, and Adam West as Batman. And I wrongly assumed that kind of everybody would see it and recognize it, and then so on and so forth. And I was shocked at how many comments I received on that one by younger listeners who had never heard of any of those actors at all. I have never felt so old as I did telling comic book fans, mind you. It's not like they were just, knew nothing about any superhero stuff at all. I was telling comic book fans who Christopher Reeve was, and man, that I got to tell you, that really took the wind out of my sails. But I get it. There's everybody has a first time experiencing like one of these older franchises, right? I actually remember the first time I ever saw the Adam West Batman, and it was in 1989. It was in the middle of all the um excitement and stuff around the Michael Keaton Batman movie. That'd kind of be a story for another day. Maybe I'll tell that at some point. But I remember though seeing that old 60s Batman show for the first time. So I get it. It's just that for some people, my podcast is that on ramp to some of those older shows. And the reason I bring all that up is because I figure if some of the people listening to the podcast have never heard of Christopher Reeve as Superman, they probably have never heard of Bewitched or I Dream of Jeannie. So I'm going to start by really quickly kind of catching them up to speed, and then we're going to go from there. So in 1964, a TV show debuted that September called Bewitched, and it starred the actress on the right hand side of this picture I'm using here today. She didn't have hair like that. That was the AI, but I was so entertained I kept it. Because I thought, man, that does look like something out of the 1960s. It's got kind of a Lawrence Welk vibe, which is super entertaining to me because I love the juxtaposition bet between Lawrence Welk and the Hellfire Club. Young listeners will have no idea what the Lawrence Welk show was either. It was something my grandparents watched. It was super cringy. So, so the idea to me of Lawrence Welk's Hellfire Club is just awesome. At any rate, let me get back on track. So, okay, Bewitched starred Elizabeth Montgomery as a character named Samantha, and she's a witch. And they had an interesting take on what that meant. Like, for instance, let me use an example from Dungeons and Dragons for just a second. In Dungeons and Dragons, they have these two concepts. One is race, one is class. Your class is kind of like your occupation in a way. Um, and so examples of that would be like a wizard or a sorcerer, things of that nature, right? Conversely, your race would be like you're an elf or you're an orc or you're a human or whatever. Well, so at any rate, on the TV show Bewitched, they actually say witch is not a class, it's their race. And I always thought that was super interesting that they don't seem to be learning how to cast spells and that kind of thing, which is what we're used to in most other franchises like Harry Potter or Dungeons and Dragons or whatever. Instead, they're saying it's just something they can do from birth. In fact, on the show, Samantha ends up marrying this guy named Darren, who may or may not be a villain. We'll get to that in a second. But she marries this guy named Darren, and they have a little girl named Tabitha who, from an extremely young age, has powers and can do all this stuff. And well, I'll leave it there for right now. So that's pretty much what you need to know about Bewitched. Is she's a witch who marries a human named Darren, and she's doing like housewife stuff. She's staying at home and so on and so forth. He works for, I want to say, an advertising agency. I haven't seen the show for years now, but I watched it constantly as a kid, mostly because I had a crush on her, you know. And I wasn't the only one. There were a ton of guys that had a crush on her. And then likewise, the show I liked even more was I Dream of Jeannie. And the setup in that is there's an astronaut named Tony who he doesn't even make it to space. He's in like a 60s rocket. It launches from NASA and it encounters some kind of a problem. So before he goes into space, the rocket splashes down in the ocean. He washes up on this deserted island and he's trying to write SOS out of like driftwood and shells and stuff like that that's on this island. And so he finds this, I'll call it a glass bottle. This is the thing the genie comes in this version. It's not like in the movie Aladdin. I think that's kind of always what we think of when we think of the lamp for the majority of people, probably, where it's like gold and it's more horizontal. You know what I mean? Almost kind of like a teapot shape. This is not like that at all. This is a very vertical um glass bottle. And I want to say it was pink. Again, I haven't seen it for a while, so I'm a little fuzzy. But at any rate, so Tony, the astronaut, finds the bottle and I think is dusting it off a little bit or something because it's got sand on it. And of course, that's him rubbing the lamp. So a genie comes out and they just call her Jeannie. They don't give her like a different name. But something I thought was really interesting is when she pops out, she is immediately in the mood for romance. Like she kisses him. And by the way, she was played by Barbara Eden, who's the person we're seeing here on the left, the image I'm using this week. Who, man, again, everybody had a crush on Barbara Eden. And she's also aged like insanely well. All these years later, she's still a really pretty woman. But at any rate, um, so he gets three wishes, of course. And so his first wish is for a plane, but she doesn't speak English. So he's trying to explain what a plane is, kind of like through charades, and she misunderstands. So she makes a bird. And as I'm watching this, I'm wondering to myself, like, okay, so did she summon the bird from elsewhere? Or did she just make that out of thin air? And if you look at other episodes in the show, I actually think she's just making it out of thin air, which in a from the perspective of a role-playing game with the kind of stats and stuff we use in RPGs, that's insanely impressive to me. But we'll put a pin in that. So she makes him a bird. He conveys that that's not what he wanted, so she sort of waves it away. It just doesn't exist now. He conveys that what he wants is a boat. She makes him a very old-fashioned boat. Because, by the way, both Jeannie and Samantha from Bewitched have been around for centuries. So I can't remember what kind of boat she makes now. It was like a Viking longboat or something like that, like with oars, but whatever it is, it's old, you know? And again, he doesn't like it. She waves it away. And as he's frustrated and pacing around, he says, I wish you spoke English. Then she does. So I'm watching this and I'm thinking, okay, so your three wishes are up, right? You're done. But even though she seems to have free will, she's sticking with him. And that's super interesting to me. So then he says something about a helicopter. So in this case, she doesn't make it out of thin air. It's his friends were searching for him. So she brings the helicopter here. And so he tells her basically as the helicopter's coming into land, he's telling her like, okay, uh, I saved you or whatever by letting you out of the lamp. You saved me by getting the helicopter here. It was nice to meet you. We're done. Like I got a fiance I need to get back to, so on and so forth. And again, she has free will. She still calls him master. Even though she goes back in the bottle, she wants to be with him. So the bottle rolls over into, he's got like a book bag thing there with his belongings. So she sort of stows away, and that's how she gets back to America. Um, and then hijinks ensue. So he has a genie at home all the time. He kind of tries to keep people from knowing, what's what there. But those were the two TV shows. They were both wildly popular. Um, Huge franchises by 1960s standards, in my humble opinion. I go to toy shows and stuff like that all the time, and I will see I Dream of Jeannie lunchboxes and Bewitched lunchboxes and just all sorts of stuff. They had a ton of merch back in the day. So now let's get into a little bit more about what's kind of going on in each show, right? So on Bewitched, I had assumed because this was always in reruns, like especially over summer vacation when I was a kid, whether I was like in elementary school or whether I was in high school, they might have still been doing it when I was in college. Um, I would see it all the time in the summer, both shows. And as I was watching Bewitched, what I kind of wondered is if, because it's for sure a product of its time, right? But I was thinking about like Martin Luther King and Malcolm X and all the stuff going on in the 60s that had to do with race relations, right? So I kind of wondered if the reason they made witches a race was um because they were trying to tell the story about interracial marriage, and they thought that people would flip out in 1964 if, because like imagine that show if they had cast Nichelle Nichols, who played Uhura on Star Trek, right? Imagine if she was Samantha. It'd be a totally different show. You know what I mean? And so I felt like the suits at the network probably thought they couldn't do that. So, you know, getting Elizabeth Montgomery is not going to ruffle any feathers. And we can still kind of tell this story, though, about this, what was at the time an unconventional marriage, right? So I kind of wondered if that's where they were going with it. Um, and I did a little research, and I guess the official thing is it wasn't supposed to be about that at all. It was supposed to be about feminism. And that on that show, witchcraft was like a metaphor for stuff that to me was not readily obvious. So it's, let's say you have an episode where the refrigerator is empty and um they need groceries. And the problem is for whatever reason, he doesn't have enough money right now. Maybe they just had car trouble, maybe this, maybe that, whatever. And so maybe he's saying, well, like she'll be like, I'll just use magic and make food out of nothing, right? Like this isn't a problem. Let me just do my thing. He will always be kind of like, no, Sam, I don't want you doing that stuff. Let me work, let me earn the money, and I will buy the groceries. And so that's, to me, that's really weird. If that's what the show was really about, was she was wanting to kind of do her own thing and have independence and stuff like that. Um, which then that's interesting too, because that puts a whole new light on, because on the show, her mother would show up quite a bit, and the mom hated the husband, you know? Um, and I'd always thought they were just playing up the sort of the cliche mother-in-law thing from sitcoms. That if it was about feminism the whole time, that's really then about the mom kind of saying, stand up for yourself and stuff like, you know what I mean? It just takes on such a different light in my mind anyways, if that's what was it was really about. And then it makes Darren seem like kind of a jerk, right? Um, because he's kind of saying, no, stay home, be whatever, barefoot and pregnant in the kitchen, or that kind of thing. Um, so yeah, that's very strange to me. But even when I thought it was a race thing, that still makes Jaren, yeah. It makes Darren seem like a jerk, because then he's still like not really accepting her for who she really is, and so on and so forth. Yeah, it's very strange no matter how you look at it, right? And now let's talk about I Dream of Jeannie in that vein for a minute. So with I Dream of Jeannie, I don't know if people were picking up on that dynamic or whatever. And if I Dream of Jeannie was like a wish fulfillment thing for men in the 1960s, think about that then, because like Jeannie always calls him master, even when he says you're free. She's like so insanely submissive. She's still hanging out. She's she's so like loyal to the guy. There's no limit to the number of wishes he gets. On and on like that. And I mean, man, Jeannie was hot to trot. Like from day one, from that, like he lets her out of the bottle and she's making out with him immediately, you know. And of course, if we're talking about sort of the male fantasy thing, Barbara Eden, man, she was certainly just insanely good looking. So at any rate, um, so I thought that was all very interesting. And then I wanted to talk a little bit about power. Because then that's going to bring us into the more game stuff. So the power level of these two, like, so on Bewitched, something that was always weird to me was Sam doesn't really, to me, seem like she has any limit on her powers. And by the way, if I'm wrong, if we have any Bewitched fans listening who can think of an example that I can't think of, feel free to list it in the chat, by the way. But I watched the show all the time, and I remember thinking she was like omnipotent. It seemed like there was nothing she couldn't do. The only thing that seems kind of not that way is they kind of paradoxically say there's a hierarchy of witches, and that she's not as powerful as certain other witches, like her mother, for instance. And then I think there's some kind of a group of elders. And these other ones have the ability to do stuff like they can punish a lower level witch by like taking away their powers or turning them human and things of that nature. Which, by the way, we also saw on Star Trek The Next Generation with a race called the Q, where the Q, to me, seemed to be omnipotent. And and by the way, like I was saying on Bewitched, it's, like a kind of its code for feminism and stuff like that. The Q were often used by Gene Roddenberry, who was a devout atheist, as code for religion, right? So they were supposed to be godlike in terms of what they could physically do. But again, there was this idea that there were like other Qs out there that could punish the Q that we know most well by turning him human and taking away his powers. The same thing was going on Bewitched. And despite the fact they can do that, I still feel like every time we see Sam do something, it seems limitless. It just seems like there's anything she can do as long as she wiggles her nose. And then on I Dream of Jeannie, um, she has a gesture she has to do too, which is cross her arms and kind of nod her head, and they make like a weird sound effect as her power works. But again, Jeannie seemed pretty much omnipotent to me, right? So let's bring it back to the game. I, as the game master, am pretty nervous about players playing omnipotent uh player characters for fairly obvious reasons, right? That's a good way to wreck a game world. It's completely unbalanced. When we talk about game balance, it's hard enough to run, for instance, an episode of Justice League when, for instance, Jason wants to play Superman, but Dave wants to play Green Arrow. And it can be really hard to run those two on the same team. You know what I mean? It's even harder when the character sheet just looks like a bunch of infinity symbols. Sorcery, infinite. Spirit, infinite, you know. Um, so I didn't want anybody running roughshod all over the campaign. And so aside from the obvious, which is I always wanted to see a crossover between the two, um, I want one reason for putting Sam from Bewitched and Jeannie from I Dream of Jeannie in the Hellfire Club, which is why they're both dressed like the White Queen in this picture, is because I feel like the Hellfire Club characters, partially because it's a secret organization, so most people are unaware it even exists. But I feel like it's kind of a little thing I'm setting off to the side and saying this is the GM's thing here. And if somebody really threatens to like really drastically screw up my game world, then the Hellfire Club can step in and kind of right that ship. You know what I mean? So having all the powerful characters kind of clustered together, that's kind of why we're doing it. And by the way, the same with the female Dr. Manhattan, exact same thing. We eventually, hasn't happened yet, but she's going to end up in the Hellfire Club too, because Dr. Manhattan's another one of these godlike characters that can just wreck a campaign. But yeah, I mean, that was kind of it. I feel like I said everything I wanted to say. I'm trying to remember if I left anything out. Um, if I did leave something out, or if there's something you guys want to talk about on the subject, just let me know in the chat. We can pick up there. I think this video is plenty long as it is, so I'm going to wrap it up. I hope that you guys have a great week. As always, if you're willing to take a moment to hit like, check to see if you're still subscribed because YouTube loves to unsubscribe people without telling them. Ring the bell so you know when we upload more stuff. And yeah, leave a comment, not only to continue the conversation, which I love to do, but it helps with the YouTube algorithm. I think as I understand it, it helps our channel be seen. And on my end, that's what I want the most out of this. I just want to share the story. Just want to talk to everybody about what I love, right? So yeah, I hope you guys have a great week and we'll see you in the next video.